Hi everyone, in this tutorial we'll be painting a photo I took along the coast. This is Red Bluff in Sandringham, and I'm standing from a bit of a viewpoint up top looking down at the scene, and the Red Bluff is my focal area. So I painted this scene on location, and that helped me to understand a lot of the colors in person. So today we'll be doing a little gouache study of it. I'm using toned tan paper by Strathmore, and the paints I'm using will be a somewhat limited palette. I have some paint left over from a previous session that I just re-wet with some water, and then I'll be adding a couple more colors to it as well. The gouache is still fairly wet because I only just painted with it about an hour before filming this, and I was spraying it with water, so it's not completely dried out gouache that I'm trying to revive. The real-time tutorial is over on my Patreon. It's just over an hour long, so if you like to follow along in real time you can find that there. I start with a drawing just to get the placement of things. The horizon line is nice and high because I'm looking down at the scene, so I have a higher horizon line, and I use my kneadable eraser just to lighten the lines afterwards, so they don't show through in the final painting. And a couple of extra colors I've added to the palette, so I've got lemon yellow, and then a yellow deep, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and then a cerulean or primary cyan, or you can use a phthalo blue, and that is my limited palette. And I'm going to start by blocking in the sky, and I started off a little bit thin with the paint, but I later make it a bit more creamy, so you want to use a generous amount of paint. I'm using the white with cerulean and just blocking in that top, so I'm seeing quite a bit of blue-green in the sky, and I mix a little bit of lemon yellow into it as I move down, and I like that bright kind of sunny color. This photo was taken at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so still a few hours away from sunset, but you're starting to get those warmer golden hour light, so starting to head in that direction. And then there is a little bit of grayness in the distance along the horizon, so there's a little bit more red in there, so I add a bit of alizarin crimson into the sky just above the horizon line. And once I finish blocking in the sky, I want to paint the reflection of the water, which is a really beautiful blue-green color. And I've painted this same scene on location on an overcast day, and it's interesting to observe how different the color is. So on an overcast day, the water is very much gray and very light in value, which is a direct reflection of the color of the sky. So it's very interesting to observe the same scene under different light conditions. And so I'm mixing ultramarine blue and cerulean with white to paint the water. In the distance it's more blue. As it comes closer to us, I observe more it leans more towards blue-green, so I'm adding in more yellow. It also gets lighter as it moves towards us, so I'm adding in a little bit more white. And then there is also the reflection of the Red Bluff into the water just below it, and in that area the color shifts more yellow, and I'll paint in more of that reflected warmer color a little bit later. For now I'm just averaging the color and just blocking it in with just a blue-green. I kind of left the area where the tree on the right would go, but in hindsight I should have painted over it. I've gotten into the habit of leaving areas unpainted because I do that in oil painting, and sometimes when I switch between the two mediums some habits transfer over, but you could just block in everything with the blue-green of the water. And here I'm blocking in some of the sand, so it's a really light value. It's the lightest value in the whole painting, so just white with some yellow and red, and blocking that in. And then here I'm deciding to finish blocking in that shape of the water, which I could have just done before. And while I do that, I paint in a little bit of the ripples in the water, which just help it to look a little less flat. And then if you observe the water, you have the waves or the foam coming in, but around that area, the water also gets a little bit more purpley grey. And there's some warm kind of darker yellows as well. So there's so much colour there, and it's especially noticeable when you observe it in person. So now for the distant piece of land, I'm starting with a more purpley blue color. I will layer on some greens on top of that later, but just to help with increasing the atmosphere and distance, I start with that. And then with the cliff face there, I'm starting with a nice warm yellow and just blocking in the average color. I'm not going into the details on the cliff face just yet. I'm trying to get a really saturated color in there because that's my focal area, and I like how the warm orange, yellow, pinkish tones really come out in the warm sunlight. So just blocking in those average colors for now and getting the shape in. The interesting thing here is the value and color of the paper is more or less the color and value we want for the piece of the cliff that's just next to the bright orange bit. So I can actually leave that and use that to my advantage. And so I move on to blocking in the trees and all the foliage, and I'm starting with a cooler color which is more representative of some of the shadows tucked away between it, so more blue, red, and dark in value. And I'll come back later and add the lights on top of that. I also like how in this composition you have that tree on the right, which just kind of blocks your eye, stops it from falling off. And so that's a compositional device I use to lead your eye back up. So hopefully you look at the red bluff or the cliff face, then your eye kind of goes down the sand and then goes up the tree, which we'll paint in later, and kind of travels in a circular motion. Now mixing up some white, yellow, blue, touch of red, and painting on the light on the foliage in the very distance. So adding a bit of warmth to the color there. It is being hit by the sunlight, but not making it too green or too saturated because it is in the distance. So we need to desaturate it and not make it as yellow green. And then with the foliage closer to us, doing the same thing, but we can add a little bit more yellow into it because it's closer in distance to us. I'm painting on a little bit of the land in the distance, just kind of suggesting things and keeping it simple because it's not my focal area. Now I'm also painting in more of the reflected color into the water of the cliff face. When it comes to painting in the details on the cliff face, I squint down really hard at the reference image and just paint the simple shapes that I can see. So try not to get caught up in details, but rather just placing the large abstract shapes that I can see. And that is what I'm trying to do here. So we have some shadow shapes being created. As the sun hits the cliff, it creates a shadow, and it's those shadow colors. There's warm and cool in it, but there is a lot of warmth because the warm cliff face is reflecting more warm light into the shadows. So I've mixed a fairly warm color for it. I'm ready now to paint in that tree on the right hand side, and I'm just suggesting it with some dry brushing. You can experiment with different types of brushes to see what texture and shape works best for you. I'm still using my angle brush, which I just find to be very versatile, and I not only paint the positive shape of the tree, but I also come in with some of the blue of the water and carve into the shape and paint the negative space around it as well to help me get the right shape of tree. And I add some branches, and some areas that are being hit by the light are just a little bit lighter in value, but overall that tree is pretty dark. So here I'm poking in some holes between the tree to indicate the water behind it. And I paint in another tree just to break up the line of the sand. And add in a little bit more shadow and texture into the foreground, but not too much because that's not my focal area, so I don't want to make it too busy, but I do need to add some shadow in just to ground that area a little bit more. And that's about it for this painting. I increase the value a little bit more on the cliff face and get some of that really nice bright yellow color in there. But otherwise, this is a straightforward little study of a scene, and if you've never painted on location, I encourage you to bring your paints outside and try this in person. I definitely use the color notes from my on location painting to help inform this little study. So I hope you enjoyed painting along with me, and I will see you in a future video.